I'm Tom Robinson. This is Six Music. As promised, we have a wonderful 70-minute interview with Jim White coming up, starting with the record we've been playing guitars from his current album.
Playing guitars, the whole dang world is playing guitars. Friends come calling from near and far, every last one's toting them playing guitar. Them guitars go. They go. Heaven, hell, or the wishing well, where souls bound is sure to tell. Sure is. When folks get to wondering who they are, they work it out banging on a playing guitar. Yeah, them guitars go. Them guitars go. As the pickers pick, the strummers strum, the string goes twang and the body goes hum. Guitars remind you where you're from, be it South Alabama or Kingdom Come. Playing guitars, the whole dang world is playing guitars. Can you be much bothered with who you are when your fingertips dancing on a playing guitar? Yeah, them guitars go. They go. Now they're playing in church, they're playing in bars, they're playing in the backseat of broke down cars. There's a handful of drummers drumming here and there, but folks playing guitar, now that's everywhere. Playing guitars, the whole dang world is playing guitars. From Skid Row up to the Walk of Stars, the in-crowd's got them all playing guitar. Yeah, them guitars go. They go. Now some play fast, some play slow, some play loud and put on a show. Across the whole wide world, it's all the same. Folks playing guitars is the name of the game. Playing guitars, the whole dang world is playing guitars. Then I look in the mirror and what do I see? Oh no. Just like every dang where else I look, there's a guitar player. Staring right straight back at me.
How wonderful to have new music from Jim White, and the latest album is called Waffles, Triangles and Jesus. Jesus had to be in there somewhere,
Yeah.
and he's joining me now in this pre-recorded interview.
I'm joining you, not Jesus.
Yes, indeed. Well, Jesus is always with me, so here we are.
I heard that, Tom.
That's right. You were described in one review as a charming, voluble and erudite conversationalist with a completely disarming line in self-deprecation that belies the craft and intensity of his work. And I can't think of a better introduction to you. It's so nice to have you
If you
back.
went to college.
Did you go to college, Jim?
I did, in fact, I did. I got out of high school and fled the academic world as if I were on fire. And then when I was 30, I decided I wanted to make something of myself. And I was living in New York City, driving a cab, and I knew there was a college nearby. It happened to be NYU, which is, I wanted to go to film school. I thought that'd be a good thing to do. So I just walked in and asked them for a scholarship. And they kind of looked at me like I was crazy. And I just kept walking in every day and saying, I really need that scholarship. And little by little, I won people over until I talked to the head of the department. And he said, no, you're never going to get a scholarship. You'd have to talk to this person and this person. I wrote all the names down and talked to each one of them. And each one of them said, you got to talk to this person. And I penetrated the bureaucracy and ended up back in the office of the head of the school. And I said, I've talked to everybody. It's you. And he said, I can't give you a scholarship. And it was really an interesting moment. There's a lot of synchronicity in my life. I was on the 10th floor of this building, and I looked across in New York City. It's like London, you can see people doing their lives at 10 flights up. And there was this, when I first came to New York, the first time was to be a fashion model, right?
You were going to be a fashion model?
Yeah, I was a fashion model for a while. For about 5 years, I was a model. But when I first got to New York, you can close your mouth. When I first got to New York, the agency that gave me a job said, you need a different haircut because you look goofy. And they sent me to this extremely flamboyantly gay hairdresser's place. And I was this born-again Christian guy. And he opened the door, and he was wearing this flowing gown, and he had like eye makeup on. And we didn't see a whole lot of that in the Pentecostal church in Pensacola. And he looked at me, and he went, spiritual. And he started running his fingers through my hair. And I thought, well, I guess I'm leading a kind of a new life here. This is different. And he cut my hair, and he was a really connected human being. He immediately understood what was lying underneath the surface of me. We talked for a long time. And so flash ahead 10 years, and I'm in this guy's office, and he's just said no to me, get out. And I look across the way, and there's that hairdresser cutting somebody's hair in the same apartment that I was in 10 years earlier. I'd forgotten that I'd ever been over there. And I watched him for a second, and the guy running the school was kind of puzzled. And then I looked at the guy from the school, and I said, it is fated that I'm supposed to be in this school. You need to change your mind right now and give me the scholarship. And he looked at me for a second, and he kind of stammered and said, well, I mean, there is the emergency fund, but... And I said, fine, let's use the emergency fund. And he gave me a scholarship to NYU, which is the best film school in America, and that's where I went.
I'm going to take you right up on that conversation, move the story on from there, after we've heard the first of our tunes tonight, because this is from your debut album, from Wrong-Eyed Jesus, a theme that seems to have run through your life on and off. This is Word Mule. from the album Wrong Eyed Jesus on the Marker Bop in 1997. That's Word Mule by Jim White, who's our guest tonight in this extended interview on Six Music. Jim, what happened after you got your NYU scholarship at film school?
Well, you just played Word Mule. Down in the basement is where you checked out your cameras when you made your little student films. And there was a guy working down in the basement named Vince, and he was about the blandest. We all kind of joked he'd end up being a dentist or something like that. He worked in the cage there, so he checked out the cameras, Vince. And Vince, he was always real sweet, just real calm, very simple person. And he ended up being the head writer of the X-Files a couple years later, and then he went on to create Breaking Bad. And he's a huge fan of my music, and he decided that song needed to be in a really important moment in Breaking Bad. So it was when he goes into that garage and he's putting all of the pieces of the puzzle together. Word Mule is the background music to that. And I didn't know what Breaking Bad was. And I knew Vince was a good person, but I didn't pay any attention to media much. And, they wrote me and said, we're going to put your song in there. And I said, oh, okay, thanks. And when I was here, actually, in England, when it came out, and I came back from whatever show I was doing, and there were like 792 emails to me from all around the world, people saying, what just happened? I can't believe your song is in that. He actually wanted to put 3 of my songs in Breaking Bad, but the other producers wouldn't let him.
Well, one is pretty good.
Yeah. It's been a fun ride. And when he went and promoted the series, he would always talk about our friendship, which was real meaningful to me. He's a real good human being. It's nice when people that are that high up in the world have good hearts, and they're not just ambitious or greedy or, all of the other things mentioned in the 7 deadly sins.
Okay, so let's get a chronology on all this. At what age and what year did you come to New York to be a fashion model?
I came there when I think I was 24, 25. I was having a nervous breakdown because I was a fundamentalist Christian, and all of a sudden I couldn't be that anymore. In the Deep South, if you can't be a fundamentalist Christian, there's a lot of pressure from your community. So I figured, let me get the hell out of this town. And I thought the weirdest possible place I could possibly go and the weirdest possible thing I could possibly do would be go to New York and be a fashion model. So I did. I went up there, and all of these weird coincidences happened that ended me landing a contract with an agency and getting sent to Italy, and then all of a sudden I'm in Italian Vogue, and then all of a sudden that falls all apart, and I'm practically homeless. I'm starving.
Driving cabs?
I drove a cab for many years. I was almost homeless for a while in New York. I lived in a closet for a while, and I was selling things on the street. I would go digging garbage cans each day for things to sell at the thieves market at night. There was a guy once brought a severed head in a glass case that he had stolen out of a car. I'll never forget that. Turns out it was a pathologist on his way somewhere, and he stopped to get a bite to eat, and the guy stole the head and thought, I can get a couple bucks for this.
Jim, you couldn't make it up.
No, you can't.
Are you ever going to write this down?
I'm working on a book right now. I guess 2 years ago, I won a big literary prize called the Pushcart Prize for short fiction. It's a short story that appeared in a magazine in America. So I got to meet all the high rollers. It was a room full of like Pulitzer Prize winners and stuff. And, they were all real sweet and encouraging and said, you need to, because the story that won, it's a memoir of synchronicity in my life, particularly how I met David Byrne and got signed with him. I was a model for about 4 years. I lived in Milan and Paris, and I was in London briefly. I made a fair amount of money, and then I went back home and I loaned it out to drug addict friends, which is, I don't recommend that.
No.
I never got any of the money back, and all of a sudden, a year or two after the modeling, I was destitute. I'm kind of like a shark. It didn't occur to me that I would go back to modeling and try to make money. I just thought, well, I just have to keep moving forward. There's a dumpster. Let me dig in it and find what I can sell on the street, which is what I did. There may have been some mental health issues at play, but at a certain point, I just decided I better do something because I'm a person who needs to say something in my life before I disappear. So I got this idea to go into that school. So I was a non-traditional student. I went late. And my film did well. It won all these awards in the film festival. And like everything, I didn't really think much about it after. I just kept driving the cab. I get lost easy. And I was driving the cab. And
that's not a good quality in a cab driver.
I don't get geographically lost.
Okay.
I actually have a fairly infallible sense of direction, except when I'm in London. But I get lost spiritually, psychologically. And ended up finding myself in a bad state. I contracted a fatal disease if you don't get it treated, and I didn't get it treated because I was clinically depressed at the time. And while I was sick, I had to give up my apartment in New York. I went back to the redneck Riviera and lived in a trailer there, writing songs to pass time. And those songs ended up being the songs that David Byrne heard on what is reportedly the world's worst demo tape ever made. Sound only came out of one speaker. And
it was enough, though.
Yeah, I guess it was.
And he signed you to Luaka Bop.
It was 93 when I wrote the songs, and 94 when I made the tape. The tape then made its hands. I didn't go looking for a record deal. Two people in the world knew that I played music because I was real secretive about it. It was therapy, and I was kind of embarrassed of what I sang about. And so my best friend knew, and he wanted a tape, so I made him a tape, sitting in the kitchen, banging on pots and pans and singing with the tape recorder on the other side of the room, didn't know anything about anything in terms of recording. And I gave it to him, and he had just got accepted to a film school in Los Angeles, and he played it for his girlfriend, who was a big shot at the school, and she played it for Melanie Ciccone, who is Joe Henry's wife, and she was Daniel Lanois' manager, and she's the one who, we're talking because of her. She just decided that this crazy guy needed a job or he was going to not make it. So she called me regularly, and eventually led me to David Byrne. First, she told me to send one of those tapes to Warner Brothers, and they sent me a real nice letter back saying, "Dear sir, we have received your tape. We feel the material is very weak. We have no interest in having any further contact with you. Do not contact us ever again." That was their rejection letter. And the hilarious thing was that David Byrne got the tape and said, "Something weird is going on here. I like this." And his parent company was Warner Brothers. So he took the tape up to them, and because David Byrne brought it in, they said, "How fascinating. This is wonderful. We love this. This guy's amazing." And it's like the Turkish astronomer and the Little Prince, There's a Turkish astronomer who discovers the asteroid that the Little Prince is on. And he goes to tell this convention of astronomers about it, but he wears a traditional Turkish garb. And everybody laughs at him and says, "Well, your data can't be correct. You're a goofball." And he comes back the next year and wears a suit, and everybody says, "What an important discovery." And it's the same information. Same thing with the tape.
Jim, we're going to have to play another song, and if I had to choose one song to introduce somebody who didn't know your music, to kind of give them a rough kind of pencil sketch of a typical Jim White song, then I think "God Was Drunk When He Made Me" would be a good one. And we'll take a listen after this.
Six Music.
Whether you draw, paint, sculpt, touch and swipe, build, strike, cut and stick, fold, knit or snap, listen along to Six Music. Create some art. From fresco to finger painting, be inspired by what you hear. And then next weekend, share your masterpieces with us in what could be the most exciting communal art workshop ever.
Art is everywhere.
Saturday morning from 7, join me, Marianne Hobbs, live from the Turner Prize exhibition in Hull as I open Six Music's digital gallery for Art is Everywhere next weekend on BBC Radio 6 Music.
The Tom Robinson Show.
Six Music.
Jesus and the fiery furnace, or the devil in the deep blue sea. Preachers say I'm gonna burn in hell for all eternity.
From the 2000 album No Such Place on Luaka Bop Records, that's Jim White with God Was Drunk When He Made Me. Jim, coming from a fundamentalist Christian background, how well did that go down with your friends and acquaintances?
Well, they don't have a lot of sense of humor. I like to call them the Christian jihadists. They're not too happy about that. In fact, I was at the Calgary Folk Festival one year, and I was invited to, I guess they saw Jesus in the title of my record. This is the first year that I was a musician. And they invited me to be on the Sunday morning gospel sing. And I thought either these Canadians have a sense of humor or they're rather dim-witted, but I'm just going to go and see what happens. And it was two real hardcore Christian bluegrass bands and me and a legendary rockabilly artist named Sleepy LaBeef. Now, Sleepy LaBeef, for the uninitiated, he's a 6'6" whiskey drinking, bar fighting, grizzly bear of a man. And so I thought, I see what the Canadians have done. They bounced two heretics and two believers. This is all going to work out fine. So the two acts before me, they sang songs that we used to sing in church, bluegrass harmonies, is heartbreakingly beautiful. You know, they had all the tropes. The banjo player looked like his brain was about to explode. The stand-up bass player lady looked like she had just been diagnosed with a bad disease. The flat picker, you know, he looked like he was shooting deer with his guitar. Everything looked right, and they sang their songs. And then I got up and I sang "God Was Drunk When He Made Me." And the Canadians are so great. They cheered and laughed, and I was pretty happy. And I coined the term Christian jihad when I turned around and saw the scowls from the two bands that had played before me, the bluegrass bands. And I thought, well, at least I've got Sleepy LaBeef with me here. He'll protect me. And I sat down, and Sleepy smiled at me, and he leaned forward, and he said, "Son, you will burn in hell forever for that song."
Wow.
And then he got up and told the audience at 67 or 68 how he had just rededicated his life to the Lord, which is what you do when you get old. You start making deals with God because you want to go ahead and get on to heaven.
Has any of that crept up on you just yet?
No.
No.
No, I'm not making any deals with anybody. And he told me if I sang another song like that, he'd take me behind the tent and teach me about Jesus. And it all worked out pretty good. And bless his heart, he was trying to help me because, fundamentalist Christians, they believe that if they don't get you right with God, that bad things will happen to you. It's the same with any fundamentalist religious point of view. And it's just how far you take it. You have to understand there's goodwill involved, even if there's bad will showing itself at the front.
You listen to BBC Radio 6 Music on The Tom Robinson Show. My guest is Jim White, and we're taking a stroll through an extraordinary life. You did mention a fatal disease. You didn't die. What happened? How did you get yourself sorted out, fixed in the late 90s? Well,
I had peritonitis, which can be fatal if untreated, and it was untreated because I was clinically depressed and didn't have health insurance. And in America, I was bankrupt. I owed $20,000 to NYU for the stuff that I couldn't get on the scholarship, and I was in real trouble in every way. So I was laying in bed sick writing these songs, and my friend the Count came over. He loved me, and he's a plumber, and he said, "I'm scared. You don't look like." I was real pale and I couldn't walk, and he said, "I'm scared you're going to die, and so I'm going to go to the library and see what I can find out." So he went to the library. This is a guy that never went to college, that barely graduated high school, and he came back the next day and he said, "Your immune system is failing." And this is a guy who grew up in the country, who his favorite game growing up was bend the tree. That was the Count. And he said, "You need to get exercise." And I had tried walking, and walking made things worse because it's aggravating the intestines. So I told him that, and he said, "Well, I'm going to get you a bike." And he went home and he got a bike, and he brought it to me. And I said, "This isn't going to work." And I rode about a block and started feeling like I was going to go over, and I rode back. But a little while later that day, I felt something like I hadn't felt in a while, like I felt like I could stand up. So I stood up, and I walked around a little bit, and I thought, wow, that's interesting. So I got on the bike and rode a block again. And then incrementally, a block, 2 blocks, 3 blocks over the course of a month, I got to where I still had it, but I could function. And my immune system started working again. I was diagnosed by a redneck plumber. He saved my life, basically.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Jim, you and I first crossed paths in the early noughties when Six Music had been founded. We've only been going since 2002. Mm-hmm. And so the arrival of Drill a Hole in That Substrate and Tell Me What You See coincided with the birth of our radio station, more or less. And it was a great introduction to you and your music. Why on earth was it called Drill a Hole in That Substrate and Tell Me What You See?
It was a phrase that I heard. My truck was broken down on Gulf Beach Highway in Pensacola. It's a rough neighborhood, and I was under the hood trying to figure out, the accelerator linkage broke loose, and I was trying to figure out, the spring was gone, I was trying to figure out a way with a paperclip to put it back in place. And I heard a loud string of obscenities, and I heard people running. And usually that means in America some shooting's about to take place. So I popped up from under the hood and looked, and there was a construction site right next to me. There was a foreman, and he had these blueprints in his hand, and he was just cussing a blue streak and stomping and looking at people and pointing at them and going, you, what happened? And I was captivated, and finally he pointed to the guy with the jackhammer, and he said, drill a hole in that substrate and tell me what you see.
And you thought, instant album title.
Well, what that means is that there was a foundation they were on. The pipes didn't come up in the right place.
Yeah.
He was looking for the pipes, because that's, once you drill the foundation, you can't put the pipes in. And I named the record that, and I realized a couple years later, oh, yeah, the pipes in my foundation don't come up where they're supposed to either. So that's why I named it that. And I had to drill a hole in a lot of psychological substrates to figure out what the right blueprints were.
Jim White, it's such a pleasure talking to you, and we could have chosen any number of great tracks off that album, but I think probably the most immediate and also my favourite is If Jesus Drove a Motorhome.
Here's a little waltz that I very seldom play because very few people like it. If Jesus drove a motor home, I wonder would he drive pedal to the metal or real slow, checking out the stereo, cassette playing Bob Dylan, motivation tapes, tricked up Winnebago with the tie-dye drapes. If Jesus drove a motorhome, if Jesus drove a motorhome, drove a motorhome and he come to your town, would you try to talk to him? Would you follow him around, honking horns at the drive-thru, double parking at the mall, midnight at the Waffle House, Jesus eating eggs with y'all? If Jesus drove a motorhome, if Jesus drove a motorhome, Buddha on a motorcycle, Muhammad in a train, here come Jesus in the passing lane, but everybody smile, 'cause everybody's grooving, ain't nothing like the feeling of moving with a bonafide motorized savior. Yes. Now if we all drove motorhomes, well maybe in the end, with no country to die for, we could just be friends. One world as our highway,
Motorhomes, Jesus, Jim White, they just go together like a horse and carriage. The production on that album, Drill a Hole in That Substrate, Tell Me What You See, was Joe Henry, Tucker Martine, and Jim White himself.
Yeah, my friends.
How was it to work with the famous Joe Henry?
His wife was the one who discovered me, and he told me early on that he wanted to make a record with me. And it's like the mountaintop. It's like talking to Buddha. It really is like talking to Buddha. Whenever I have a question, even to this day, that I don't know about my job, I call Joe, and his answer is usually 4 or 5 words that another person could have spent 4 hours saying. So it was great. I wanted to see how he did it. There was a lot of conflict in the beginning because I go real slow, and I take one musician at a time, and we try to undo conceptions and conventions. So, I get a great musician and I say, yeah, play it like you'd play it. And then I say, all right, now turn that inside out. Now play half the notes. Now kick it up a key. I try a lot of different things. Joe, on the other hand, is all about the live take. He wants everybody in the room playing at once. So when he told me that, I said, no, we can't do it. We got to do one person at a time. And he said, well, that's what I do. I do the live takes with the hand-picked band. That's why I'm the producer I am. And, finally, I kept saying no. He kept saying he needed to do it his way. And finally he said, well, I'm not the right person for the job. And I really loved Joe, and I didn't want to walk away. And I said, isn't there some compromise we can come up with? And he said, well, how about this? How about 4 people in a room playing just the core band, not the full bells and whistles? Because we're going to have an 8-piece band in there. So we agreed to that. And he said, if you don't like it, I'll just give you the producer feedback. So he guaranteed that I would like it. And then he brought these guys in. And I remember in the middle of the rehearsals, I wasn't telling anybody anything. And normally the Cicada Rhythm people are here with me today. They know my system. It's just drive the musician right out of their mind with suggestions. And I had not a word to say to them. The drummer, Jay Belrose, he's been on many Grammy-winning records. And after he played like 4 songs, I said, what can I tell other drummers to do? Because whatever you're doing, it's perfect. What are you doing? And he said, well, I listened to your demo tape, and I see you like drum machines, so I just tried to play like a drum machine.
Wow.
The best drummer in the world. And there's no ego attached with any of these musicians that Joe brought in. He knows the people, and he never said a word. He just sat in the chair and listened. His job, he felt like, was to find the right people.
Wow.
And he found them, and that's my favorite record that I've made.
Yeah, it is a great sounding record.
Thank you.
This then takes us to a kind of body swerve where you double back to the Wrong-Eyed Jesus in cinematic form. So the earlier parts of your life come together where you're making a movie that goes out on the BBC. Mm-hmm. It's a kind of travelogue with you introducing us to the kind of deep Gothic south of America and scenes and people that we would have no normal way in the UK of encountering.
Right.
And you don't even play most of the tracks on the soundtrack to it.
No.
What was the founding principle, the thing that made you decide to make that movie?
Well, it wasn't my idea to make it. It was the filmmakers who are British. Steve Haseman is the seminal character in it. He loves everything weird. And he went to a record store and saw my record cover for Wrong-Eyed Jesus, which is weird. And he said, well, I must have that. And he went home and listened to it, and he contacted Andrew Douglas, who's a very famous photographer, ad guy, does TV commercials. And they came to visit me. They said, we'd love to make a movie based on the short story in the record. So they were going to make a narrative feature film. And I told them, no, that won't work. And they said, well, we'll come and talk to you. And they rented a motorhome. They flew to New Orleans and wanted to backroad it. And they showed up with their interior, their motorhome decorated with Spanish moss. Now, if you haven't been to the South, Spanish moss is that stuff that hangs on the trees. It's that long, dangly stuff. And what these poor Englishmen didn't know is that Spanish moss is infested with an insidious parasite called a red bug. So out of the van they came, just scratching. Hello, pleased to meet you. I say, it's we've been bitten by some. And I just, at that point, I thought, well, this is going to be fun. So they talked to me about making this movie, and I said, there's no way to make it. And I played some practical jokes on them. I took them to some Pentecostal churches, and when the altar call came, I said, why don't you go up there up front where everybody's standing now and just listen to what's going on. It's great. And they'd go up, and it looked like they were going up to get saved. And in those churches, it's very few times you get new people getting saved. It's the same people getting saved over and over and over again. So here was fresh meat, and it was English meat. It was pretty great. And so they'd jump on them and lay hands on them, and they'd say, "Oh, that's very, very kind of you. Yes, we think we need to go." And it was just so much fun. I just figured, well, if they get any money to make a movie, well, I'll just go along for the ride.
I can really warmly recommend checking that movie out, listeners. It's an extraordinary journey. My wife said, "Who are you going to interview today?" And I said, "Jim White." And she said, "Jim White?" I said, "Searching for the Wrong IGs." "Oh, Jim White!" She went, "Yeah," because that was something that she had seen back in the early part of the last decade, and it had stuck with her ever since. Now, there are various seminal moments. One is when we just happened to drive past the Handsome family, who are just standing at the side of the road, happening to perform a song. Yeah. But I think the oddest one is the Amazing Grace and Melissa Swingle playing a musical saw, which we're about to hear. But can you tell us, set the scene for us?
Yeah, Melissa Swingle, her parents were missionaries, and she grew up half the time in Africa and half the time in Mississippi, and that's already interesting. She's beautiful, and as the filmmakers were making their movie, it was all men except for Rennie Sparks from the Hanson family, and I thought it was lacking representation of women. It just didn't feel right, and I kept saying, you need women in this, and so I said, what about this lady? So they worked it out with her, and up she came, and she's spellbindingly beautiful and really a powerful person, not some face. There's a soul there, big one. And they took one look at her, and she pulled up in her own car, which was a 1964 Impala, which is in the movie, that's the car she's sitting in. And they just said, she has to play Amazing Grace down by the river. Reminiscent of during the Great Depression, people were living in their cars. So down to the river we went, and that was a spellbinding moment.
Here it comes now. From the album, Jim White presents music from Searching for the Wrong-Eyed Jesus in 2004, BBC documentary film, which we've just been discussing. It sounds like so much happened around the making of that film that we don't even see in the course of it.
Oh, much of the footage that I was certain would end up in the film ended up on the cutting room floor. The filmmakers had a guiding principle. They said that they did not put anyone in the film that they did not feel love in their heart for. That's a lesson to learn. They were not going to put anybody in there to exploit. The scene that I couldn't believe wasn't in the movie, we were in South Louisiana, and there was it was a garish casino truck stop fried food restaurant, a bunch of 18-year-old scantily clad women walking around in like bikinis, serving you catfish, fried catfish. It was all truckers. And the owner of the place heard we were from the BBC and wanted to tell his story of how his nose got shot off.
We heard it last week.
Yeah, you're right. It's called In the Blink of an Eye. Right. So he sat down in a booth with about 40 automatic weapons, holding 2 AK-47s in his hand, and they were filming this. And he told the story of getting off one night and driving along, and some guys pulling up next to him and shooting, and the bullet broke the glass, took the end of his nose off. And of course, he was armed, so there was a running gun battle. And as fate would have it in the South, the car approaching from the opposite direction at 60 miles an hour was a state trooper police officer. And it was quite a story. I thought, this is gold. But they said, no, we don't like that man, and we don't think that he deserves attention, so he's not going in the movie.
So in retrospect, do you agree with them?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They took the high road, and the high road is always the road you take.
You're listening to Six Music. I'm Tom Robinson. My guest is Jim White. We're taking an epic pilgrimage through the course of Jim's life, and we're still only in the mid-noughties at this point. But what I've always found refreshing talking to you is that you're so open about the fragility of mental health. And it's a topic that people don't talk openly about on the radio or just generally in life, so that when people experience mental health difficulties, just emotional difficulties, just difficulty living in your own skin or getting out of bed in the morning, they think they're alone. They think everybody else is coping.
Yeah.
So you're here to tell us they're not.
Well, when I was in school at NYU, the teachers would give me assignments, and it'd be a 2-page assignment, and I'd turn in a 20-page paper. And I had this one teacher who was real smart. I handed him 3 or 4 20-page papers in a row, and he wrote in the comments, since you have decided to invoke the talking cure method, I will go ahead and indulge you in that and just not take off points because you were supposed to only use 2 pages. And so he let me write as much as I wanted to, and I don't remember a thing he said about anything other than the talking cure. When I talk about it, I get better. When my first record came out and I had to travel around the world being interviewed by journalists who were so smart and so interested, people like you, it felt like free therapy. Best thing you can do if you've got a problem is find the right way to talk about it. Part of the terror of mental health comes from not having names for the ghosts running around in your head. That's part of the problem. Far too often, people lock them under the cellar stairs where they grow strong. You got to spook them out of there and train them to where they don't run your life.
Which brings us neatly to the next track we're going to hear, which is from a little later, from 2012. There was a charming album called Where It Hits You. There was a lovely cameo with, was it your daughter who was at the beginning of one of the tracks? But the opening track on Where It Hits You is Chase the Dark Away. We're going to hear it right after this.
In a year of new music discovery, certain records stand out.
My album of the year is a very Stigmatic sounding record.
It's a really, really good year this year.
We're talking music for your mind.
It's so great it gives me a headache.
And your feet.
The essential albums from 2017 as chosen by the Six Music presenters.
I searched for the track titles online to see what they meant. I'm still really none the wiser, which just adds to the lure of the enigma.
Just take one sample track from it and I hope this will blow you away.
It picks you up in one state and drops you a completely different person at the end of it.
Listen Monday morning from 7.
I love finding this kind of album.
To hear the Six Music Recommends Albums of the Year list in full.
In fact, if I'm honest, I didn't choose it. It chose me.
The Tom Robinson Show.
Six Music.
We drift along down rivers, past the towns where we were born. Past broken smokestack factories, graveyards of lost loved ones.
We cast our dreams on water's dark. Just watch them drift away. We turn our eyes heavenward, but feel no need to pray. It's that day upon day, trial upon trial, wished upon, walked upon, smile we smile each day. Won't chase this dark away. Chase the dark away, away, away. Chase the dark away. Short and aren't we double bow that we become? The inventory of our sins has struck us dead and dumb. The stories we once lived to tell have long since faded. It's that day upon day, trial upon trial, wished upon, walked upon, smile we smile each day. Gonna chase this dark away, chase the dark away, chase the dark away. Falling leaves might tell a tale of harder times to come, but let us not surrender to our fears and turn to run. For our dreams will rise up above this earth to mingle with the stars, to return as healing summer rain belong to these ancient scars. It's that day upon day, trial upon trial, wished upon, walked upon, smile we smile each day. Yeah, that smile we smile each day. Yeah, that smile we smile each day. Come chase the dark away. Oh, chase the dark away. Someone help me chase this dark away. Darling, smile, smile, smile.
From 2012 on Loose Music, the album Where It Hits You. That's the opening track, Chase the Dark Away by Jim White. Am I right in detecting a change of tone in that interim period between the kind of mid-noughties through to 2012? That album seemed to mark a different approach.
Well, I'm moving from singular to plural in my existence. I had become so singular that I felt like I didn't belong on this earth when I wrote Wrong Eyed Jesus. I felt like I didn't belong here. And it was kind of a howl of despair to the world saying, save me. And the world did save me. It was pretty great. And so I tried to work my way back from being this utterly isolated figure, which I was, living in a trailer in Northwest Florida, bankrupt, near death, trying to work my way back to being part of the human condition. When my kids were born, suddenly everywhere I went, instead of me saying I was saying we. And that's the goal. The goal is to move from I to we, so that when you go back to I, as you lay down that last time, you go having had a successful journey. If it's all I all the way to the end, when you leap off, it's going to be a lonely leap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm floored by that, because it's been my own experience too. You know, I came to married life and fatherhood quite late in life myself.
You got to connect.
It's so life just changes in so many ways.
Yeah. My kids taught me more than anything I ever learned. My kids taught me. And it wasn't happy lessons. When they started barking back at me in my sharp voice, I listened.
Between that album and this point, there's a number of years have elapsed, but you haven't been idle.
Oh, no. I'm restless. I'm almost manic. I always have to be doing something. No, I won a Pushcart Prize for a story I wrote, like I told you earlier. That was a big deal. I produced records for a bunch of people unknown artists that I love their work, and I wanted to help them.
You teamed up with Johnny Dowd for one.
Me and Johnny made that record. That was fun. Johnny's amazing. On this tour, I'm actually playing a song that he and I co-wrote called A Man Loves His Wife. And then I made a bluegrass record with a band called Packway Handle Band. They're a local Athens band. I always wanted to make a bluegrass record. We released that in the States, and it did pretty well. It charted on the Americana chart. We were number 5 on the Americana chart. And I was so excited until I called the label and said, how many records did we sell to get to number 5? And they said, 262. And I thought, man, I would have bought 200 myself just to be at number 1.
If only you'd known.
Yeah, just give me that data beforehand so I can just go ahead and make life perfect. It's said that Taylor Swift's dad, who's a multimillionaire, runs a trucking empire, bought 100,000 copies of her first record so that she would debut at number 1. This completely unknown artist. I've heard that story. I'm not sure if it's true or apocryphal.
I often think, getting a music career off the ground for most people in this time is kind of like the old space shuttle launches. The space shuttle was this little tiny vehicle, and then you used to have this enormous booster rocket underneath it. Right. And then underneath that there was the Saturn with 4 solid fuel boosters around that. And even then, when they counted down and hit launch, it took off at about 1 mile an hour, pulling away from the Earth's atmosphere, because it was such a big gravitational pull.
Yeah.
But once the thing got out of the atmosphere, you only needed the 4 little rockets at the back of the space shuttle, right, and it could go round the Earth in just one little puff of fuel. Right. And a music career is kind of like that. Because
you're right.
Once Taylor Swift had achieved her liftoff with help from her dad,
right,
then she had the wherewithal to be up there in orbit the rest of her career.
That's absolutely the best metaphor I've ever heard for it. We've got this caterer of people here with me on this tour. They're sitting in the studio with us here, and they're fighting at that point right now to do that, and that's why they came with me. They came to play to British audiences and get a little extra boost on their career.
Absolutely. And a song is really the kind of key thing to that. I always think. I do. I think a single song. If you have an OMG song that, OM with a few extra letters in it, G, that people just hear once and go, oh my God, what is that?
Right.
That can do it for you. And I'm just saying that for my own experience, because in another life, I had a 30-year music career, and I only really had 2 top 10 hits in the course of 30 years, which isn't a big batting average. But those 2 songs were enough to give me the full 30 years, because each time they got me away from the gravitational pull of playing bars,
right,
and into being on TV and being on the radio and stuff.
I'm going to steal that metaphor.
So, in my experience, it wasn't the gigging, it wasn't it was the song. Get the song right, and the rest sort of takes care of itself.
You're right.
Anyway, we have a large number of songs to choose from for you. I would very much like you, if it's possible, to get the guitar out and just give us a rendition of Earnesty bass.
Oh, I accidentally did bring a guitar.
Well, that's...
Unintentionally, accidentally.
That's a handy, handy thing.
And thankfully, we have some backup singers here who know a thing or two. Do you know who Ernest T. Bass is?
No, I want to be told.
Well, there were two seminal Southern TV shows in the Deep South. There was the Andy Griffith Show, and there was the Beverly Hillbillies. Everybody in England knows about the Beverly Hillbillies. I haven't found many people know about Andy Griffith. He was a small-town sheriff who never wore a gun, and he was sagely and wise, and he was everything that you would hope of the American dream. And I used to watch the show living in the Deep South and think, well, that's nothing like life in the South. Every once in a while, this character would show up. And he was just unhinged, just utterly unhinged. And his name was Ernest T. Bass. And he was always coming to town looking for a woman and drinking shine. And anytime he courted a woman, he would always, the way that he would get her attention was by throwing rocks through her windows. And he made sense in terms of the South. So I often identified with him when the show was on and thought, I'm kind of like Ernest T. People in America, they know who he is, even though he was only on 5 episodes. So eventually I thought, I wonder what ever became of him. And I thought, he fell in love eventually. And so luckily I have the lovely Andrea DeMarcus here to play the female part in the song. This is called Ernest T. Bass at Last Finds the Woman of His Dreams. And to be clear, Ernest T. Bass talks like this. He talked like a hillbilly. All right. And he doesn't trust anybody. Just like most Americans now, right? I don't know with no blue-eyed girls. Them blue-eyed girls, they'll knock you down. Melt you with their icy stares. Leave you lying in a puddle there. That's why I don't hold no, I don't hold no, I don't hold no blue-eyed girls.
No, I don't hold no store-bought man. You'll pick your pocket just as fast as you can. They'll leave you lying in a gutter broke. That's why I don't hold no store-bought folk. In fact, I don't hold nobody but you.
Say what? Well, how to do? Nobody but you. Nobody but you. What in the high holy hell would I do without you? Oh, without you. Say I don't hold no, I don't hold no, I don't hold nobody but you. Now them preachers make my skin break out.
They do that to you too?
I don't know, with the way they shout.
Always yelling and
brag talking like preachers do.
God this and God that.
Yammering on the whole day through.
They never stop.
That's why I don't hold no, I don't hold no, I don't hold nobody but you. 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 What in the high holy hell would I do without you? Without you. Oh, without you. Without you. 'Cause I don't hold no, I don't hold no, I don't hold nobody but you. Between the howling, scowling, screeching creatures,
short-nosed cheerleaders up in the bleachers,
tinfoil-plated movie stars,
them salesmen peddling broken-down cars,
them fast talkers with the crooked tongues, them ones who's old but say they're young, them cowtown grifters with fake hair, them ones who say what's here is there between all them folks and what they do. I don't hold with nobody but you.
Nobody but you.
No, I don't hold with nobody but you.
I couldn't think of anybody else.
No, I don't hold with nobody but you.
Nobody but
no, I don't hold with nobody but nobody. Nobody but you.
Ernest T. Bass at last finds the woman of his dreams, performed by Jim White with Andrea DeMarcus from Cicada Rhythm. The original is on the album Waffles, Triangles and Jesus, but that was performed for spontaneous and extemporary in the studio.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Oh, our pleasure. Thomas, always a pleasure to come here and shoot the bull with you. You're good at it.
Well, it's great. Last time you were here, you said that you were considering a return to academia at some point. Is that still a temptation anywhere, or is it going to be music from here on
So
in?
many things have opened up. The next thing I'm going to do is finish a novel I'm working on. Well, it's a memoir, Romana Clef kind of a novel, and I'm pretty far. I'm about 75% through, and I want to see where that goes. I'd love to teach. I'd love to help people. I had a few good teachers, like the guy who told me about the talking cure, and a philosophy teacher I had. I had a few people who understood that even though I seemed crazy, there was something going on, and I would love to pass that on to other kids who are struggling, like I was. I was struggling hard. A few good teachers can make a big difference in your life.
Jim, the tour is almost over.
Yeah.
You have one more date tomorrow night in Dingwalls in London. I imagine it must be sold out by now. Things were pre-recording this 2 weeks ago. But what is going to be happening after the promotion for Waffles, Triangles and Jesus?
Well, I thought after that I'd go to the professional ice skating career that I've always wanted to do. No, I never know where my next foot's going to land. I just never do. I know that I'm working on that novel. I know that my kids need to see me. So that's going to be real important, because whenever I go out on this tour, people always say, oh, why don't you tour more? It's like, well, because I like being a father, and I don't want my kids to think of me as a voice on the phone. So I'll go home and take care of business there and make sure that everyone feels loved. And then something will happen. And that's kind of how it's always been in my life. As I put my foot out, something lands under it. And usually it's interesting.
Whatever it is, please come back and tell us about it.
Thank you so much for having me.
A total pleasure. Would you care to just introduce this next song for us? Tell us about Wash Away a World.
Oh, Wash Away a World. It's on the new record, but it's an old song, actually. It's one of the first songs that Lawakabop heard when they decided they wanted me on their label. And I was reading a lot of Jim Thompson novels, because he's lost in the world of I, and he writes well about it. And everything he said resonated with the struggle I was having. So I wrote this song as a young Jim Thompson character. He's doomed, and he wants to be free.
Jim White, thank you so much. We'll see you again soon, I'm sure.
Thank you, Tom.
Shit, I can hear him drinking. I was up on the hill, he's walking right into the sun. As far as I'm concerned, he can keep right on walking. Caught a little hummingbird, then I let him go. He could be in China now, for all I know. And do you know how to whisper, babe? Do you know how to lie? You can kiss me now if you wanna. I guess I don't mind. just a little space I'm using to hide some of my silence. Man, I wish it would thunder. Man, I wish it would rain. Man, I wish it would lightning. Man, I wish it would storm. Man, I wish a dam would break. Flood would cleanse my soul. Wash away this bad old world so a new world could be born. I wish it would storm. I wish it would storm. I wish it would storm.
The extraordinary Jim White with Wash Away a World from Waffles, Triangles and Jesus. That's his current album. And he's playing, well, he's just played band shows in Sheffield, Newcastle, Glasgow, Manchester, Leeds, Bristol, Birmingham, Brighton and Guildford. But he finishes tomorrow night in London at Dingwalls. I don't know if there are still tickets left. I imagine there will be quite a hot ticket there. It's had some nice reactions from you. Thank you for your feedback while that was going on. Livy Kicks said on Twitter, I'll go back and listen to this show in full. I'm not too familiar with Jim White, to be honest, but he sounds like an inspiring fella. I've never heard mental health talked about like that, and it is heartbreakingly true. And quite like Chris on Twitter, oh great, I'm just laughing at the name, not at the content of the tweet, said part of the terror of mental health is not having names for the ghosts running around in your head. Quote from Jim White, and a link there. Al S says, blimey, I like Tom's music career metaphor, but he has a very sketchy hold on space travel and rockets. Mookie Kalhan says, superb interview with the fantastic Jim White, such great music too. Thank you, Six Music. Hashtag Americana, hashtag Weekend Vibes, hashtag Music 2017, hashtag Good Times Go. Rarity Mum, whose Twitter handle is The Daily Growl, says, such a great interview going on between Jim White and Tom this evening. I could listen to Jim talking all night. And 45 Connor 78 says, hey Jim White, my name is Connor. I just heard your fabulous, interesting and intensely intimate and honest, straightforward interview and music tonight with Tom Robinson. Mental health issues also reside in my own life. Please stay strong. And a contented customer from Charlie C. Brown says, fire, candles, wine, Tom on Six Music, a lovely Saturday evening on the sofa. Our aim is to please. I'm glad that you at least have been pleased. I hope the rest of you have enjoyed listening to Jim chatting and batting the breeze as much as I have. It's a complete pleasure talking to him. Here's Kieran Leonard.